on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, the latest from home and abroad, from Victoria running out of gas to the latest news from the UK and the US. I'll speak to a nurse who is fighting back after health authorities tried to force anti-white critical race theory down her throat. She was disciplined after challenging course material that claimed Christianity spreads racism and all white people are racist. We'll speak to an investigative reporter uncovering the politically motivated prosecutions of January 6 participants, including journalists covering the event. And Darren Grimes will tell us why Ireland's leftist globalist PM has stepped down in disgrace. And as always, we'll have plenty of lefties losing it that will shock and delight you. Joining me now is Director of Verve Communications and Sky News contributor Prue McSween. Prue, let's start with the Australian energy market operator warning that Victoria is running out of gas faster than initially forecast, with an extreme risk of outages within the next 4 years. Yet still, we've got the Allen government down here pushing ahead with their mad renewables targets. Prue, we are sitting in this state on decades of gas reserves. Some say hundreds of years of gas reserves, but that's not doing us much good when there is no gas exploration and no new gas projects.
Rita, isn't it astounding the brazenness of these Labor governments that have just... They're so obsessed with this climate change, this anti-fossil fuel, a mantra that they've got. And the fact that AEMO, which has always been a little bit, to me, too far to the left when it comes to climate change warnings, etc., is even saying, guys, in 4 years, you're going to run out. There's a shortfall. So what is the Allen government doing about it? Absolutely nothing. They think that by banning gas in, new homes is going to offset the shortfall. This is going to be a winter of discontent, we would hope, because people will suddenly realise in Victoria and in other parts of Australia that if we rely so much on fossil fuels to keep our heaters on, our aircon going, our lights on, and frankly, the governments, because they have no plan B, they've just fallen over themselves to demonise fossil fuels, and sadly, we're going to be left shivering in the dark.
Well, sadly, down here, the Victorian Liberals are part of the problem. They've signed up to these mad emission cuts. They could actually be formulating a policy to get Victoria out of debt, to give us cheap, reliable gas by saying we're going to do gas exploration. This is going to be our path out of paying off this massive debt instead of taxing the long-suffering citizens down here. But no, they're too terrified to actually deviate from what the Allen government's doing. Staying in Victoria, the Auditor General's office has found that the cost of cancelling the 2026 Commonwealth Games has been more than $589 million, including $150 million for employees and operating costs and $380 million settlement to the Commonwealth Games bodies. The report said that the cost estimates for the Games and the government publicly released in August 2023 of $6.9 billion was overstated and not transparent. It added significant amounts for industrial relations and cost escalation risk, but it did not disclose that the budget already included $1 billion in contingency allowances to cover these and other cost risks. So they blew up the costs when they were trying to justify why this event had to be cancelled. But nevertheless, the headline here is that we're paying almost $600 million for a Games that we're not going to see, Prue.
Well, it was all to get him re-elected and to take the heat off him, wasn't it? He was hoping that the regional centres would be buying the scam, and, he'd promised that they were going to be some of the venues for the Games. And, of course, it was all just a big con job. Andrews was conning everybody, and sadly they fell for it. And now we have this situation where we've got IBAC. Why isn't IBAC? Because one of their charters is to be able to look into the scams of the public sector. Are they not investigating what has gone on here? Because Victoria is a basket case, and you just look at what he's done to that state, the debt you're in, and the fact that Alan is continuing on this same route of conning people, overspending, lying, obfuscation, leading you down the wrong path, as we all know. And Victorians are just, as you say, well, of course, there is no alternative government from what we can see with what's going on with the Liberals, but Victoria is a basket case, and, you know, it's just terrifying that politicians can get away with doing this kind of thing and there are no repercussions other than in the ballot box.
Now, the Summer Games aren't far away. The Olympics are being held in Paris in July and August this year, and temperatures there at that time of year can reach around 30 degrees. But because of climate concerns, Prue, the Olympic Village will not have air conditioning because installing air conditioning units would hurt the Games' carbon footprint. I wonder if the athletes were consulted about this. I mean, a lot of athletes are pretty woke these days. Maybe they're happy with this.
Well, this is the thing. This is a generation of the woke who've been sort of groomed since babyhood that the world's going to end, and so maybe they will buy it. But how you can expect your principal performers to operate, you know, run a marathon when they are sweltering in their rooms, you know, sapping energy, etc. I mean, they've got this geothermal energy idea where they somehow cool underneath the village. But, you know, their testing was showing that even if it was 41 degrees outside, it's only going to be 28 degrees in the villages. Well, I don't know about you, but if I was lying awake at night in 28 degrees contemplating running a marathon, I wouldn't be happy. And yet they're quite happy to spend all this money buying, 300,000 condoms. I would have thought the sportsmen and women won't have energy to do anything on that front if they're not going to have any air conditioning.
Well, they always supply a lot of condoms for the village every Olympic Games. That seems to be a fairly consistent cost. But I do wonder if all the officials, the AOC officials, will be in air-conditioned five-star hotel rooms. I think they will be. So it'll just be the athletes who'll be sweating it out. Now, let's go to the US House Committee on Oversight and Accountability. They heard explosive witness statements exposing Joe Biden's involvement in his family's corrupt influence peddling schemes. Have a listen to this.
Mr. Bobolinsky, who's the big guy? Joe Biden. Are you sure about that? Because when
Joe Biden.
You're sure?
I'm 1,000% sure.
Because when Hunter Biden did his deposition under oath, he said, I don't know who it is, even though he was copied on an email that said H will hold 10% for the big guy. You sure it's the big guy is Joe Biden?
1,000%, and there's other text messages that back that up, that the brave whistleblowers, Shapley and Ziegler, have produced, not from my phones, not from my BlackBerry that I took screenshots from. They took them from subpoenas directly from Apple's iCloud that back up the fact that Hunter knew the big guy was Joe Biden.
The big guy is the brand. The big guy is the lift. The big guy is the one who showed up at golf outings, who took phone calls and meetings and lunches and dinners with Hunter Biden and his business associates. Is that right?
Correct.
That was Hunter Biden's former business associate. Prue, it's increasingly becoming clear that the Biden family's dodgy business dealings were really not the work of Hunter Biden. Sure, he was involved, but, you know, that drug-addled whore enthusiast probably couldn't mastermind much. It was Joe Biden himself. He was the product being sold. His power, his influence was the product for sale.
He's the enabler, but of course it's like he's a protected species, Mr. Teflon. We read or hear that, you know, 9 members of the family directly benefited. Millions of dollars were paid by China and other countries. So, you know, you would hope that the voters of the US would wake up to themselves and not be prepared to compromise their morals and principles to get their big guy in. If they hate Trump so much because of who he is, I mean, this guy is a masterclass. I mean, he's making Trump look pretty lame, I think.
Now let's talk about this ongoing Princess Kate saga. I thought it was going to be done and dusted once we saw footage of her shopping with Will, looking happy and healthy, but no, there's still all sorts of doubts and conspiracy theories, including on the mainstream media. It's not just social media putting this about. I heard on Melbourne FM radio this morning all sorts of conjecture from the hosts. One of them saying it's not Kate, it's a body double, it's obviously not her. To me, it looks like her, but there is a former journalist who's used artificial intelligence to unblur the paparazzi shots of Kate, the short video of her. Now, obviously, AI is not an exact science, but when this tool is used, yes, I can understand why people think it's not her but I think that's the AI. I don't believe, when you look at the actual video, Prue, to me, it looks like her. She looks pretty thin, but it looks to be like Kate looking happy and healthy, shopping. What's your take on this? Because, I don't know, call me naive, but I seem to be on the outer thinking that this video puts all the doubts to rest.
I agree with you, and Prince William was there and, you could tell it was him. Look, this is what really, I find it really distressing that now the mainstream media is hopping onto this bandwagon. They're wanting to milk this story as much as they can. It's like they're leeches. When you look at what happened with Princess Di and how Harry and William reacted in terms of how she was virtually hunted to death, it's almost like they're doing this to Kate now. And this story really is dead now, as far as I'm concerned, but they just want to keep it alive for their own benefits. It will be good when she actually does start going out into the community and they can see that she is alive and well. She's been through hell. I just feel it's very sad that she's been hunted down like this again. God knows what her mental health's like, but you can understand the cynicism of the royal family and aggravation when you see this kind of theory that's going on. And, it's just really damaging on all fronts.
It is damaging, but I think the royals have got some accountability here, because no matter how unfair the interest is and how intense that interest is, that may not be healthy, just a 5-10 second Zoom video from Kate on camera saying, I'm fine, needs a little bit extra time to recover, that would put everything to rest, but they just will not do it, which is just feeding this craziness. Prue McSween, thank you for your time this evening.
Pleasure.
The political bias apparent in the intelligence community and the justice system has seen trust in once respected institutions plummet in the US. Politically motivated investigations and prosecutions and a two-tier justice system are a feature of despot nations, not the United States. Well, not until recently. The House Judiciary is launching an investigation into the Department of Justice's treatment of Blaze reporter Steve Baker, who was arrested and charged for his coverage of the January 6th Capitol riot. This investigation is the culmination of months of hard work from journalist and broadcaster Brianna Morello, who joins me now. Brianna, this is a big win for you, I think a big win for common sense. Take us through what's been going on behind the scenes and why you are seeking justice for Steve Baker and others.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. There are so many January 6th defendants who have been persecuted right now by our Department of Justice, and their behavior has been egregious throughout several trials. Steve has been in the courtroom for many of those cases and even found the Department of Justice committing perjury during the Oath Keepers trial. Ultimately, what happened with that is they weren't happy when Steve reported that 2 of the Department of Justice's witnesses lied on the stand, and he had the video proof to prove it. During the testimony, one of them declared, Officer Lazarus, that he witnessed an interaction between Officer Dunn, Harry Dunn, and the Oath Keepers. And in fact, Steve proved that individual, Officer Lazarus, was not even in the same building as Officer Harry Dunn. And he did so by pulling up the surveillance footage. And so suddenly, the Department of Justice found themselves really fired up about Steve's work. He's also working with members of Congress. And so that's when they initiated the arrest. And it's been ongoing since then. Steve has been releasing amazing stories exposing the Department of Justice. And I sat there in the courtroom after they had him arrested, and they had him in leg irons, being dragged off into court with people accused of felonies. He's accused of misdemeanors, minor offenses. And the most egregious part of all this, Steve was with other journalists who have not been charged with any crimes on January 6th. And they were in those same restricted areas, allegedly, as Steve was. The only difference, Steve's not going with the narrative. He's actually committing journalism, and they don't like that.
Well, have stories like Steve's and others we've heard in recent months changed public opinion on what happened that day? Because for a while there, the crazy narrative was that this was an insurrection. It was as bad as 9/11. It was a crisis in democracy. But we've seen a lot more tapes released of what actually happened inside the Capitol, and more accounts. And when we compare it to the Summer of Love, those BLM riots where billions of dollars worth of damage was done to public property, private property. There were people killed, more than 20 people killed, many more bashed, arson, looting, just crimes across the country. And there seemed to be very little criminal consequences coming out of that. And then when seeing January 6th, prisoners who are still behind bars, whose cases still haven't been resolved.
Yeah, I think so many Americans are learning about what's actually happening regarding January 6th, and they're doing so by critical work that, myself, Steve Baker, Julie Kelly, Darren Beatty have all put out there. It's exposing what they don't want us to expose. Ultimately, put this in perspective. You mentioned the Summer of Love. I'm from New York. In New York, the city was just completely destroyed by these violent protesters. And ultimately, two of them actually, who were attorneys, they did actually successfully firebomb an NYPD vehicle just moments after officers stepped out of the car. We had the video evidence of them doing so. The Department of Justice, that same Department of Justice under the Biden administration, came up with a plea deal which gave them less than a year in prison for almost murdering NYPD officers. Now, you compare that to people like Enrique Tarrio, who, people don't agree with his political views, and that's fine, but he wasn't in the area. He wasn't even there on January 6th. And yet the DOJ used text messages and took them out of context to prosecute him. And he's in prison now for 22 years because they say he orchestrated January 6th. And sadly, 22 years isn't long enough. The Department of Justice actually appealing his sentence. They want him in there for a much longer time. Originally, they asked for 32 years in prison for a man that wasn't even there that day. That's just how egregious this whole situation is right now.
That is incredible. And there's another conservative social media influencer, Isabella DeLuca. She's also been arrested for her alleged role on January 6th. She's said to have helped move a table out of a window and participated in behaviour that's alleged to be unlawful. Tell me about this case. Is this likely to also generate a little bit of attention?
Yeah, it is. So Isabella, according to the statement of facts by the Department of Justice, was there on January 6th, and she quickly entered a window, according to them, in the Capitol, but then stepped out after she saw things were kind of escalating inside. And so they're prosecuting her. But what's interesting is if you go through the statement of facts, for these misdemeanor offenses, again, folks, this is misdemeanors, not felonies. These are misdemeanors. They went and they subpoenaed her bank records and also subpoenaed got a warrant from Twitter to hand over her communications on Twitter. So they went above and beyond. If you look at the statement of facts, they're actually using her social media posts against her. Here in the United States, we have something called free speech. Now, the Department of Justice doesn't like it, and they're using that against Americans, but they're not supposed to. So, this is going to be one of the many cases that I believe is a free speech case, and will likely, it's DC jury pool, so don't take these convictions for anything seriously. It's heavily liberal. They convict these defendants before they even hear their cases. That's just how it is. But I suspect Isabella and so many other J6ers are going to get their cases appealed, and they're going to win. Now, we've gotten several hopeful signs that they're going to win their appeal process. Just recently, the DC Appeals Court actually ruled that the DOJ was wrongfully adding enhancements on the J6er sentences, which is going to significantly reduce so many J6ers sentences, which we're hopeful for. But again, this is just one of the many things that are going on right now.
Well, yeah, I don't know how any Republican or Conservative is going to get really a fair trial in DC. Last I checked, I think in 2016, Donald Trump got 4% of the vote in DC, and it was 5% in 2020. So if that's your jury pool, then you're in a bit of trouble there. Now, Donald Trump is calling on Liz Cheney to be jailed after it was revealed her January 6th committee suppressed evidence that Donald Trump pushed for 10,000 National Guard troops to be deployed to protect the nation's capital that day, after previously claiming they had no evidence of such a request. Brianna, how much trouble could Liz Cheney be in now that we have learned that she and her committee buried critical information from the January 6th inquiry?
Yeah, they also deleted depositions, critical depositions, which now people like Congressman Larry Loudermilk, had to dig up. He had to get people to come in, forensic people to come in and dig up these depositions, and she deleted them. And so ultimately, what do we have here? Well, yes, there are several crimes that she could be accused of, but remember, this is the Department of Injustice that's being run under the Biden regime. And because she's allowed them to use her as a political prop for their theater, I highly doubt there will ever be justice unless we get a new administration in November. Then that's probably the only time we'll have a shot at justice for her. But she allowed this to happen. She knew what was going on and continues to this day to allow the left to use her as a political prop.
Brianna Morello, you're doing great work. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Still to come, I speak with a woman who is suing health authorities for forcing racist, anti-white political dogma down her throat. She is fighting back, and we'll have lefties losing it. Welcome back. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. And let's start, Lefties, with an anti-white film that is bombing in the box office. It is a bloodbath, folks. No one wants to watch this turkey. Let me play you a little bit from the film, The American Society of Magical Negroes, that's the name, and see if you can work out why this hate fest is such a failure.
What's the most dangerous animal on the planet?
Shark.
White people, when they feel uncomfortable. White people feeling uncomfortable precedes a lot of bad stuff for us. That's why we fight white discomfort every day. Because the happier they are, the safer we are.
Oh dear. Now let's look at how illegal immigrants in the US are capitalising on the leftist laws in blue states and educating others to do the same.
Mi gente, he pensado invadir una casa en United States, ya que me enteré que existe una ley que dice que si una casa no está habitada, podemos expropiarla.
If a house is not inhabited, we can seize it, he says. And that's precisely what has happened to this poor homeowner, arrested for trying to reclaim her own house from squatters.
Be trying to steal my house. Yes, you are.
How about that? A squatter standoff. A property owner confronts a group of people she says moved into her $1 million home in Queens, and our cameras were rolling as dozens of officers showed up.
Several people were taken away in handcuffs, and one of those arrested may surprise you.
Yes, the poor homeowner there was arrested because she's not allowed to change the locks of her own house to lock out these squatters living there illegally because, well, that's just the law. It doesn't matter if it's her property that she pays taxes on.
She's in the process of selling it.
No, he locked it.
But she's been locked out. She claims squatters moved in on February 6 and refused to leave.
What's it like being here knowing you can't go inside of your own home?
It's enraging. It really is.
In New York, squatters have rights after 30 days.
By the time that someone does their investigation and they do their work and their job, we'll be well over the 30 days, and this man will have stolen my home. And now she's back.
He's got no documentation.
Just bills. So, Adele, you're getting arrested right now?
I'm being arrested.
For what?
For being in my own home.
And where's your lease?
She's fighting the house. It's not her house anymore.
My deed is current and legal.
Arrested for unlawful eviction. She changed the locks on a man who claims he lives there.
So how does this all end then? When do you leave?
The way it ends is either she pays me my money that I put into the house, pay me the money, and I'll leave, or send me to court, and we deal with the judge in court. It's that simple.
It's not that simple. It's a long process. Evictions can take close to 2 years to complete.
You know, there's enough squatters and scumbags already in America. They don't need to be importing any more in. I'm pretty sure that dude wasn't an illegal immigrant. But fancy that poor woman being arrested for trying to change the locks of her own house so these interlopers can't live there for free. Now, let's look at this next dude. He's called names and bullied for daring to enjoy his lunch when others around him are fasting for Ramadan.
Look at this kuffar. Everybody's on Ramadan.
I know, I actually feel bad for eating.
And this guy's,
I'm going to have to put this away, ain't I?
this guy's stuffing his face. This guy just sat here stuffing his face.
And let's end lefties with this blast from the past, from the COVID era.
Today, start working on not touching your face, because one main way viruses spread is when you touch your own mouth, nose, or eyes.
My next guest is bringing a lawsuit against the NHS and the Tavistock Gender Clinic for discrimination. Amy Gallagher was a nurse who was bullied by leftist NHS chiefs after she challenged the racist and frankly offensive notion that being white means you must be racist. She was left with crippling anxiety after she challenged the woke views being pushed in NHS lectures she was required to attend. Amy Gallagher joins me now. Amy, you were taught that whites don't understand the world, and also as a Christian you were told Christianity is responsible for racism because it's European.
Yeah, that's correct. That's what they were teaching. And the issue with it was not so much that, as you may expect in a training course, you may get one rogue lecturer that has some pretty radical eccentric views. The issue really was that they weren't allowing for any debate or discussion. So when I simply disagreed and explained that we need to be aware that not everybody thinks in this way, that's when I was put through essentially disciplinary procedures and told that I was inappropriate and told that I essentially had the wrong opinions to become a psychotherapist. So that was the main issue. They weren't only just saying offensive things, but they weren't allowing people to say anything different.
Well, that's disturbing. One, to have these notions pushed uncritically, but to have this sort of material in a nursing or psychotherapy course, what's this got to do with any of that? This is a far left political dogma. How does it actually apply to the course you were studying?
Exactly. I mean, this is why it's so concerning. You would expect maybe like on a humanities course or in an arts course at a university, you would expect to see some of this left-wing woke dogma. But this was a clinical training. Okay, so any healthcare or treatments in the NHS should be based on evidence. And what they were using was essentially woke dogma and ideology. And I was very concerned by this because at the time that I was training there, I was aware that the gender identity clinic was having exactly the same issues and that patients were being harmed because ideology was being put before evidence-based practice in healthcare. And I was seeing the same thing happening, but with critical race theory instead of gender ideology. So that's why I felt it was so important to speak speak up. And I think the main reason, I mean, I think there's lots of reasons why ideology is affecting healthcare. I think psychologists and psychotherapists are increasingly left-wing and sometimes female, and the demographic is changing. But I also think the training providers and the education is also very left-leaning. And I think that generally a lot of organisations are allowing in outside external activist organisations to come in who don't have any qualifications in medicine or healthcare, and to teach ideas that are not evidence-based. And they're often doing that to boost their diversity quotas. And that's the real issue here.
Well, we are seeing the sciences, the medical profession being captured by ideology, and it's so dangerous because it's one thing to have other professions, academia, media, whatever, lean heavily one way or the other, but you don't want political ideology to be influencing medical care. That is something that is, I think, something that would worry everybody. How prevalent is it? Is it the new graduates that are emerging that hold these views and are required to hold these views essentially to get through their university course?
Yeah, I think it's probably in the last 5 to 10 years or so. So when I did my nursing training over 10 years ago, I didn't really see any of this that much. I mean, the ethics of nursing is that you're taught to view people as individuals and that you shouldn't bring politics into discussion with a patient, and you should keep your views to yourself, and that you shouldn't judge any person by the protected characteristics. But I think in the last 5 to 10 years, that's significantly changed, and it's happened quite rapidly. We know that the things that I know that the things that were being taught at the Tavistock are not just exclusive to the Tavistock, but there's research that shows that up and down the country in the UK, clinical psychology training courses are teaching critical race theory, and they are teaching decolonisation and woke ideas. And since my lawsuit has been in the press, I've had so many psychologists, nurses, and psychotherapists write to me saying, I don't know what to do. I don't like these ideas. I don't know whether I should speak up. I'm so glad you've spoken up. I hate my training. I just feel it's something that I need to get through so that I can get my qualification. And it's very, there's a real kind of authoritarian atmosphere, and people just feel frightened, and they just say, look, I just don't know what to do.
This sounds like institutional bias, and I would argue institutional racism, to have this critical race theory, this really ugly doctrine based in neo-Marxism being pushed in this manner. Just more broadly, what was the culture within the Tavistock Gender Clinic like? Was there a lot of self-censorship? Were people scared to actually say what they thought because they looked at what happened with you? You're going to be disciplined. You're going to have your career prospects impacted negatively if you said something.
Yeah, so at the Tavistock, there's two buildings. There's the Gender Identity Service and there's the Psychotherapy Service, which is talking therapy, where I was. So I wasn't at the Gender Identity Service. But when I was doing my training, there were lawsuits coming out in the press about safeguarding whistleblowers and other members of staff who were suing the Gender Identity Service for having been essentially put through disciplinaries and bullied because they spoke up about some of the harms that were being done at the Gender Identity Service. And in my training course, this just was not spoken about. So we even saw with the case of Kira Bell, who's a former patient who sued the Gender Identity Service. She took puberty blockers, she went on to have her breasts removed, and then she later regretted it and felt that she wasn't supported in her decisions properly. And none of these issues were talked about. It was like it was all in the news, and where I was in the training, we just were not talking about it at all. And there was this real repressive atmosphere, like we just can't talk about these issues, which is quite extraordinary for a profession which is all about talking and about being open and being able to discuss things. That's kind of what talking therapy is. And yet there were so many things that we weren't allowed to talk about. And in my training, I was really the only person who was questioning these ideas. And I can understand why, because the responses of the lecturers, how they were responding to me when I was just asking questions, was essentially that I was being really bad. I was being inappropriate, and there was a real kind of I was being told off essentially for asking questions. So you can imagine that other students would just think, well, I'm not going to ask questions then. I just want to get my qualification and get going. So that was it was just like being at the Tavistock, it was like being in a bubble. It was just like there was this outside world, and they just didn't want to look at it or talk about it.
Well, I think they're being forced to look at it now, and there are going to be plenty more lawsuits like the one Kira Bell brought forward. But it's not just Tavistock or the NHS. Britain is getting more and more comfortable with prosecuting people who say hurty words. A lawyer who works for the government is being sued for saying only women menstruate. Apparently, the nameless claimant here believes this and other gender-critical views expressed by Elspeth Duma-Wrigley has the effect of creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating and/or offensive environment for the claimant. Is this just another way that debate is stifled and people are prevented from expressing really very much mainstream logical views because they may face this sort of legal action?
Yeah, it's very concerning. I think in the area of woke ideology and gender ideology in the UK, it feels like very much it's one step forward, two steps back. So we make gains. We've won lots of legal cases, and there's been lots of gender critical feminists or just people that believe in biological sex that have won employment tribunals. There was quite a significant court ruling of a woman called Maya Fastata, whose court case led to a judge to rule that gender critical beliefs are worthy of democratic respect in a civilized society. So we can now claim discrimination if we are discriminated against for having gender critical views. And yet there are still these cases coming through from trans activists and people who want to push back against women's rights and gay rights. I think the whole issue is that within our Equalities Act in the UK, we have the protected characteristics of sex, but also of gender reassignment surgery. And these two things could conflict. So it's really hard to weigh up the balance of both of these rights. So, I mean, it is worrying the direction that free speech is going in the UK. I mean, there's a recent hate crime law being introduced in Scotland on the 1st of April this year that essentially could see people criminalised or even arrested for what they would see as offensive views, which could just be saying that a man can't become a woman. I mean, J.K. Rowling is very famously a gender critical feminist. She lives in Scotland, and she's already saying that trans activists are saying that come April they're going to go to the police about her views that men can't become women. So, I mean, we've recently banned puberty blockers in England, which was a really huge step forward for people who were speaking out about the harms being done because of trans ideology and gender ideology. But as soon as we're celebrating that, then we have all of this new legislation coming in that's going to prevent our freedom of speech. So it's a real war going on in that we're making gains, and then as soon as we feel we're pushed back. So that's kind of the state of play in the UK at the moment. So it's very worrying.
Amy Gallagher, thank you so much for your time this evening. Good luck with your case. We appreciate your insights tonight.
Thank you.
And still to come, we find out why the very left, very woke Irish PM is stepping down in disgrace and why we should be worried about Obama's big tech activism. Welcome back. Joining me now is GB News host Darren Grimes. Darren, let's start in Ireland with the very sudden resignation of the Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar. I wonder if this has got anything to do with the Irish public's overwhelming rejection of his attempts to gender neutralise the Constitution and his unrelenting globalist agenda.
Well, be right, Rita. I mean, you don't exactly have to be Mystic Meg to figure that one out, do you? This is after a final hurrah with the only other politician that's quite as useless as him, Rita, which is President Biden. He was over there in America for a St. Patrick's Day across the pond. Now, of course, that was laden with the usual political platitudes that Varadkar is renowned for, but he dropped the mic and he flounced off as soon as he got back. He's probably gone, Rita, to work for the bureaucrats in Brussels or Davos. But look, don't let this emotionally charged swan song fool you. He's a real piece of work He's the master of the last-minute twist, because under his reign, as you mentioned, we saw referendums come crashing down like this poorly staged theatre production stripping woman and mother from the Constitution, as if words could ever diminish the essence of what they actually represent, something you've covered on this show many times before. He tried to steer Ireland into the fast lane of progressive politics, but it actually turns out that the vehicle was missing a few gears, Rita. This is the problem. His portrayal of St. Patrick, by the way, as an early advocate of open borders in the middle of a mass immigration crisis was as well, I think, a historical hopscotch that's left even the diaspora in America watching over here to be utterly perplexed by it. And I mean, as he takes a final bow, Rita, we've got to be left to wonder if the next act could be even more, frankly, zany as the last has been. Goodbye, Leo Varadkar. You will not be missed here in Britain, and I very much doubt you'll be remembered in Ireland.
Now to former US President Barack Obama, who visited Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at number 10 Downing Street. It was a bit of a surprise visit, a courtesy visit it was called. What was it about? He's hardly been a friend of Britain in recent years. In the run-up to the Brexit referendum, Obama warned the UK that it would find itself at the back of the queue when it came to trade deals if Brexit got up.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a wonder, Rita, that we managed to prize Obama from Martha's Vineyard, isn't it, really? He's probably there with Meghan Markle and the rest of them. But look, this is all a sop for the Obama Foundation, because you're absolutely right. After his infamous Brexit cameo, where he pitched Britain to the back of the queue, it was almost like a Love Actually moment, where, you know, the US president is there to act as the bully, but this was actually at the request of a British Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, who is about as welcome here as Malcolm Turnbull in Australia. But look, you'd think that he'd learned that British politics is our garden, right? Not for treading in by even the most charming of ex-American presidents, which I'm sure he is. But here he is, Rita, and he's talking about AI. He's talking about artificial intelligence with all the finesse of a Silicon Valley tycoon. He's funded by most of them, by the way. The liberal elite fund this Obama Foundation, and they probably consider a private jet a shared economy experience at this rate, despite, of course, lecturing us at every 2 minutes about our carbon footprints. But the Obama Foundation are here in Britain, or were, to angle to become the AI think tank, a digital oracle, if you will, for global consensus. But Rita, I think this is a really dangerous moment, because before we all jump on this bandwagon, let's remember that history isn't a programmable algorithm that you can code for political correctness. Great leaders and historical truths don't need a woke makeover, which is what a load of the AI tech giants are doing. So I would profit the idea that actually Obama's vision of AI will probably align with the kind of digital amnesia that benefits the bias of tech giants that work against conservatives. And I think it's a consensus that Britain, Australia, America can fine well do without. So basically, Rita, I think he should stick to climate summits where he can, you know, enlighten us all on reducing our carbon footprints in between all of these private jet landings and, you know, buying as much space at Martha's Vineyard that he possibly can, over actually helping tech giants entrench their massively liberal bias and disproportionately seeking to actually erase conservatives from the public square entirely. No thank you, President Obama.
Now, former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries has written a very thought-provoking piece on abortion for the Daily Mail, a very much nuanced piece, something that's missing from the public debate. Now, there is going to be a House of Commons bill looking at decriminalising abortion past 24 weeks. She wrote of her own experience as a nurse helping with terminations of unwanted babies. And the following passage I'm going to read is a bit graphic, so viewer discretion is advised. She writes, on delivering a unwanted 27-week-old baby boy, she wrote, I have never forgotten what I saw. There lay a tiny baby boy, blinking, covered in mucus, blood and amniotic fluid, gasping for breath, his little arms and legs twitching. I was stunned. He was breathing, I insisted. The nurse looked embarrassed and muttered, the mother probably got her dates wrong. Maybe she was more than 27 weeks pregnant. I can't bring myself to tell you how she disposed of the body of that tiny newborn. Now, it must be pointed out here, Nadine is pro-choice. Unlike the majority of people who are pro-choice, she's against late-term abortion. Many polls show us that the majority of people are against second and third-term abortions, but that nuance is rarely reflected in the public debate, Darren. It's something that the media really doesn't cover well at all. Tell me about these bills, and I know there's another bill where 700 medical professionals are urging MPs to actually lower the abortion time limit from 24 weeks to 22 weeks. Tell me about this debate, because this polling in the US, it's consistent with the polling in the UK, which shows 70% of British women favour this reduction from 24 to 22 weeks. So it shows that there is a very large group, I would argue the majority, who are pro-choice in the first trimester, certainly, but when it gets later in the pregnancy, they're very much against late-term abortions, and that includes in the second trimester.
Very well said, Rita. I mean, that piece by Nadine Dorries I found profoundly moving, actually. And this is all a hangover from the COVID pandemic, where MPs, I would argue, really quite extreme MPs when it comes to this debate, the abortion debate, they got what they wanted with at-home abortions, and now it's a legacy from lockdown, but we've extended it, where you pop a pill and terminate your pregnancy. Now, these are Labour Party MPs, Stella Creasy and Diana Johnson. They've actually pulled the pin, I would argue, on the grenade of medical ethics with amendments that actually seek to transform abortion into an over-the-counter commodity up to birth. Forget the 24-week safeguard. They say it's outdated. The need for a doctor to consult with you, because this is, as you well know, Rita, quite a dangerous thing to do. Well, they say that that's an archaic formality, right? But I argue that actually this would be like opening Pandora's box. This push for decriminalisation actually glosses over the complexities and the nuances that you mentioned so well there. The narrative it being spun is one of empowerment of women. But actually, I would argue that that dodges the bullet of consequence. It dodges the bullet of accountability. It dodges the bullet of safeguarding. All of those faster than a politician might well sidestep a direct question from you, Rita, on here on Sky News Australia. But the underlying melody of this movement that these MPs are part of, it actually sings of a really stark truth, which is the desire to redefine the sanctity of life as I see it until it's as disposable as the morning's coffee cup. And I think that's where public polling is. Public polling says, I'm pro-choice, but I am not pro these terminations at home via popping a pill, which could be dangerous for the mother, which are certainly obviously dangerous for the unborn, and really rule out the need for a healthcare professional to be on board with that. So I would argue there is a need for caution, for actual ethical consideration here, because convenience is one thing, but we can't sweep it under the rug like an inconvenient truth, right? This is a tale of two pandemics, one viral and the other ideological. And I really, really do not want to see British women get caught up in that ideological battleground in the name of freedom, because I don't think it is a freedom, Rita. I actually think it's incredibly negligent and dangerous.
It absolutely is, and I would argue immoral. And I think, again, that opinion is shared, according to those polls, by the great majority, that there has to be a term limit. Now, whether that line is 24 weeks, 22 weeks, many European countries, that line is between 12 and 15 weeks. Wherever you determine that line, to have abortion right up to birth, I mean, really, any woman who's gone through a pregnancy and has undergone ultrasounds where they've seen their baby at 16 weeks, 18 weeks, 22 weeks, they could tell you it's not just a clump of cells at that stage. Darren Grimes, thank you so much for your time this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rita.
That's it from me tonight. Up next is News Night. I'll see you Sunday morning for Outsiders. Good night.